Mary wants to be a superwoman, but is that really in her head? But I just wanna live each day to love her for what she is. Maybe I could be another movie star, but is that really in her mind? And all the things she wants to be,
Sure.
she needs to leave behind. Very well, I believe.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Kate Silverman Wilson. I manage adult programs here at the museum. I'm so excited to welcome you here to be with us this evening. We were approached about this program just a very short time ago, but we were so excited to say yes. We're thrilled to be partnering with the Fab Foundation. As many of you probably know, they're moving across the street from us sometime, hopefully later this year. And we hope this is the first of multiple programs that we can host in partnership with them. So please join me in welcoming Sherry Lassiter to the MIT Museum and enjoy the program. Thank you.
All right, and just click back and forth. Okay, super. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Nice to see you. I'm Sherry Lassiter, and I'm president and CEO of the Fab Foundation. We're a spinoff. For those of you who don't know us, we're a spinoff from MIT's Center for Bits and Atoms with the mission of bridging the digital divide. So we democratize access to the tools for digital fabrication and technology development, and that through that, we enable economic development and opportunity for everyone. So I'm joined here. I just want to point out I'm joined here tonight with I'm here tonight with my partner Luciana Bitoldi, who is a vice president at Fab Foundation and my partner in crime. And we're really excited about tonight's talk for a few reasons. One is that this is our first collaboration with the MIT Museum, and I'd like to thank Kate Silverman Wilson. Where'd you go, Kate? She ran away. There she is. She's over there, as well as Mark DeQ, who's doing the audio visual, and of course Keelan Caldwell, who's probably who brought us together. She's the new deputy director for the MIT Museum. So congratulations on that. And we're really super happy to have this be able to be in this absolutely gorgeous space and this unbelievable screen. I think it's just amazing. And and just thank you all for co-hosting this and for organizing it so beautifully. So we hope to grow this collaboration over the coming year, by potentially including workshops, more talks, and potentially community facing projects. And the reason is, and this is the reason, oops, this one. Okay. This is our website. No, I see. So this is the Fab Foundation. We're about to establish our global headquarters right there. So if you look that way, the second floor of this building, 325 Main Street, will be basically a super Fab Lab makerspace. And if you notice, if you've been here before to the Maker Hub is just underneath and behind here. So we can wave to each other across across the street. And of course, that just says to us we must collaborate because there's so many beautiful opportunities here. So and just to give a note, just to note that this is being made possible by BXP. So BXP is the developer that has brought many of the buildings that you see growing in Kendall Square. Those are being developed by BXP, and BXP decided to invest in us, and they donated the space for 5 years for us to move in, and maybe another 5 years after that if we're really good. So, and so we just have to thank them for their partnership as well. So um, I'd like to I have to introduce a very special person tonight. This is Sudebi Thakurata. She's a transdisciplinary designer from Bangalore, India. She's also associate dean and a faculty member at Srishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design, and Technology. She's also the co-founder of Depicenter, which is a design-led innovation collective. And we're so lucky to have her in the U.S. right now. She just received an award for good interventions from the Parsons School of Design. Her project, which is called Not a Toolkit, is one of 15 projects that was selected, from a global competition of projects that really are addressing the pressing issues of our times by bringing together design and social sciences. The project will be part of a permanent exhibition there, which is like super cool, right? So anyway, Sudebi, she and I first met in Bali a few years ago. We were hosting the International Fab Lab conference there, and she was on an education panel that I was organizing. And as you might imagine, just from seeing her and seeing what her talk is about, she was kind of she was very provocative, engaging, and a bit disruptive, right? She was a disruptive voice and so appreciated. She's a very creative facilitator. She's a transdisciplinary narrative designer. I don't know if you know what that means, but I bet she'll tell us, right? And she's an educator, very passionate educator, writer, researcher, futurist, you name it, and she's been working for 17 years over, across 30 countries and continents. And she works across disciplines, sectors, and contexts, basically interested in using creative approaches to design frameworks and approaches which are equitable, fair, and participatory and contextual. And so it is my great pleasure to turn the microphone over to you, Sudebi.
Hello. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Um, I am hopefully not going to bore you with a long lecture. And as Sherry, my friend, told you, I do intend to be provocative. One of the first provocations you would see is that there are tons of slides, but hardly any text would you see, except for the first or probably the last one. And I'll slowly uncover why that's so. I have a challenge over here. I'm one of those people, I cannot talk without using my hands. And I have to keep walking. But for the purpose of the video, I have to be sort of caged over here, and then I have this crown. So Mark was telling me, looks like it has been made for just you because it fits so well. So I'm trying to be confined over here. But pardon me, Mark, if I just, out of my enthusiasm, just start walking over there. All right. So I'm Sudebi, and I come from India, Bangalore. That's where I stay, but I actually am from an area called Kolkata, and it's very interesting that a lot of people, like we all have our own stereotypes about every place. People also have stereotypes about India. So India doesn't have one language, as you probably know. We have many different languages, and it is not just about Bollywood. And why am I saying this is that my journey into meaning making started very early on. And I was really fortunate to go to a very interesting school in Kolkata, which was deeply inspired by a polymath from India, who was probably Asia's first Nobel laureate, Rabindranath Tagore. And he was one of those people who never believed in boundaries. He didn't believe in boundaries of nation state. He didn't believe in boundaries of how we sort of keep doing othering to each other. And I'm deeply, deeply inspired by that. And my entire life has been for the other, making sense of my life through Tagore's lenses, and I continue to do that. Um, I realized, again, very early on that, we all believe that textbooks, books, uh, that's sort of a source of knowledge, right? We all know that. You go to school. I ended up going to a good school, a good university, and all of that. But you feel knowledge resides there. And thank God, I early on realized that knowledge doesn't necessarily is restricted to textbooks. And I have been trying to explore. Therefore, I don't claim any expertise on anything, but I'm an explorer. And I realize that as you keep talking to people, as you go and meeting people in different contexts and different places, there is nothing better than that to actually learn about what's happening in the world. It helps you unlearn, relearn, learn, and learn again, right? So what I'm going to do is, today in the next maybe 45 minutes or so, I'm going to take you on a journey of storytelling, certain stories of my life. As I'm saying that I'm not planning to give a lecture, although I'm a lecturer, I'm a dean at my university, but I plan to give you certain excerpts and snippets of interesting stories that have shaped my life, particularly in the last few years. And that's why I'll also tell you the story of this image in a bit. This talk is about from making to meaning making. I think many of you here, you are here because you might be having some connection with some forms of making or design or technology, right? And I often feel it's again my little experience in life across the world. I have been lucky to work in 30 plus countries in the world. And I've seen that very often, even unknowingly, people get restricted to the idea of making in terms of a form, and the meaning stays behind. And that's something that I would like to provoke all of you with. And how am I going to do that? What am I talking about in terms of making to meaning making, that shift, that transformation? I have again believed in a deep concept of interweaving. I feel that weaving is a very, very powerful metaphor. A few years back, I was invited at Cebu for the Making Futures conference, and I had my entire presentation using weaving as a material, weaving as medium, weaving as metaphor. And I feel that weaving is an extremely powerful metaphor for anything that we do, for collaboration, for correlation, for interconnections, for anything that we do. And I'm again using the term very carefully. I'm not only calling it interweaving, but co-weaving. How do we co-weave together so that we create a tapestry of narratives in that process of meaning making, right? And how that happens. So my life, I wear many hats. I have noticed in the last 17, 18 years of my life, there are three important elements that help in making sense. One is art, the other one is design, and the other one is technology. And it's very interesting. Institute where I teaching there for the last 15 years. It's a very interesting institute in India, probably one of the oldest design schools in India, which was deeply contextual, which deeply questioned how design is used for impact versus how design can be also used for not such good reasons, intentionally or unintentionally. So my institute is also called Srishti Manipali Institute of Art, Design and Technology. And there is a reason why that's the order. And we often talk about it. That's a discourse. Why don't we say technology, design, and art, or technology, art, and design? Why do we say art, design, and technology? So that's also provocation, which again, I am making sense of. So many of these examples that I'm going to give you in my storytelling today with my work, you would see that some of them are where technology is used to create art. Some of them where technology is at the forefront, at the, like the final outcome could be technology driven, but there are methodologies of art which are used deeply in order to get there. And design for me, therefore, becomes an approach through which this is done. It's kind of scary to see yourself out there. It's almost embarrassing to see. I mean, I've only seen people that big in movies, that too probably in an IMAX. So, I mean, didn't realize when I was putting it there that this is how embarrassing it'll turn out to be, and I'm regretting it. So, sorry about that. And I can't go, I mean, I can't skip this slide because it's important. You will see this is actually how I describe myself on social media. I'm not very social media savvy. My partner, co-founder at the Epicenter, is the one who primarily handles the social media. But this is my language. And let's just say that the last one is what I truly am. I have always been an awestruck wanderer. And I feel that the element of awe is something very important, and again, I'm talking about my deep experience and my deep realization. Think about all of us, right? Like, say there is a new technology which comes in, right? Or something like a product or a gadget or something that happens. You, if you feel a deep sense of awe that, wow, this is possible, I feel like something happens, right? That's when you feel like, okay, I want to engage with it. And there is an element of curiosity. And that's true with everything. There's a new food, there is a new place, there is a new person. So I feel like the element of awe is extremely important. And as in when we grow older, I think people have an assumption that you lose the sense of awe. And I feel I get very struck by people who are able to retain that element of being in awe. And let me tell you honestly that one of those people I know in my life is Sherry, who's older than me. But I think I've always seen her being quite awed at a new idea or a new thing or a new possibility. And I aspire to be like that and continue to be like that. Someone who's always awestruck. I'm wondering. Many of these things that I say, and you can see that I'm not particularly calling myself an educator, a designer, a researcher, all of those things I do, but this is actually how I make sense of things. I try to facilitate through different modes and media. And it's at a meta level, not just about going and designing some activities and doing those. I am a narrative designer. So Sherry asked what that means. It's something in a very different context for animation and all, but that's not how I use it. I believe that through different technologies, different forms of making, different forms of services and systems, I try to sculpt out narratives. And that's why I call myself a narrative designer. Hopefully, by some of the examples, you will be able to see why I call myself so. I curate learning. And very importantly, I believe that I enjoy weaving dialogues because there's no other way than someone to sort of learn new things. And I do believe that I help people and I try to help people across different contexts and disciplines to frame different possibilities. Again, I feel that to frame different possibilities, very often I use art, design, and technology. That's my mode through which possibilities are framed. And the other thing is what you will be able to see probably throughout the visualization of my slides, a thinking visualizer. As I said that I primarily am going to use images of different kinds. They are not stock images. They have all been developed, designed, illustrated as parts of different projects that I have led, and I'll try to give you snippets of where they came from, how they came from and all. So a few examples of my last few years' work that I would like to give you is that this is a project which Sherry was talking about, for which I had gotten an award. And it's not important that I got an award. Even without the award, I think it was a very important piece of work. So 2021, the European Union National Institutes for Culture, UNIC as it's called, they wanted to design a toolkit on fair collaborations. Now you can understand that it's very important for everyone to collaborate. We all talk about it, and I'm very sure people who are sitting here, there is a certain kind of alignment in value or vision, which is why you are here, right? You want to know about it. But collaboration isn't just about putting some people together. I think all of us know how difficult it actually is. Most people I have seen, they end up when they say they're collaborating, and it happens all the time. Either they're just together, they're trying to resolve conflict. Someone in the team withdraws because they just don't know how to be in a group. Someone starts dominating and overpowers. And very often, in fact, more often than not, most collaborations lead to somebody feeling quite bitter. Some people feel that I have done a lot more than what I should have done. And someone might say that, oh, I feel responsible. I ended up doing whatever, but these people never did. You talk to the person that you generally think are lazy or didn't do much. From their perspective, often they might say that I never found my voice, right? And that's basically what happens. So we all know that in the language of design, it's actually what is called as a wicked problem. It's ill-defined, it's multi-layered. You try to tackle one end of it, something else will come up. Everything that you want to do for that in order to address the problem can lead to unintended consequences. So it's really not something easy to deal with. Now, when European Union they're talking about cultural relations and international cultural relations, it totally, you can totally understand that they are working all around the world in almost all countries. They're saying that at the very senior level, at the level of their directors and all, if they wanted to do collaborations, which they are doing, how do they know that they're fair in those collaborations, right? So they wanted to design a toolkit. So this journey has been very, very interesting because somehow we were called on board, and contrary to how typically what we have found at the level of unique, these kinds of toolkits are done. What I figured out as a part of our work is that earlier, before we were brought into the picture, something like this would be where scholars, researchers, experts on cultural diplomacy or cultural relations would come into the picture. They would do a lot of secondary research, desk research, etc., put something together based on what they already know, write papers, and then they would call a so-called graphic designer to make it look pretty, and then it will be published. Whereas the person who got me on board had seen how, again, I have always been disruptive, and she felt that there was merit in doing it differently. So they wanted to do it in a what is known as a design-led way. So the making of that toolkit had to be done using design as an approach, which actually started by having argument at all levels, right? Because who are we going to listen to? If it's supposed to be user driven, we didn't want to be just using some so-called design kind of templates and tools, and fill it up, which is what a lot of times people do. And you're all the time running against time. Time is always our enemy, right? So you all talk about big ideas, then you do a couple of workshops, some is a great talk, you go back and do exactly what you're doing. How are you going to make sense of it? And this was actually happening during the time of the pandemic. And what we try to do, so this is, so the previous image that you saw actually was a part of our toolkit through a very immersive process. This illustration came, this one is for dialogue. And you can understand why the paths are intersecting, dialogues are intersecting, different kinds of people are doing it. This image actually meant equity. I think it's quite self-explanatory why this image is about equity. This one was for mutuality, but the point is, and this, I'll show you another image which will come later on, that was about interdependence. But what we tried to do in the design-led process was, we said that we will make the toolkit such where it is truly people-led, which means we first want to understand who are these people who would use it. More importantly, who are these people who EU wants them to use, but they just don't want to use. So we wanted to understand the lack of motivation for these people to use such a thing. And the reason why this is called not a toolkit is when we started doing our research, and we did it with 300, 400 people around the world, all virtually because it was during the pandemic time. They said, you know what, we don't want yet another toolkit. There is no dearth of toolkits. Mostly people thought that toolkits are prescriptive, instructive, they're top down, and it comes from a sort of a higher pedestal. Someone is sitting in a boardroom deciding this is to be done, and ground reality doesn't allow you to do such a thing. So we kept on pushing, saying we would like to understand who's going to give their perspectives. Then we try to sort of figure out what could be the conditions under which these people who are going to talk about the challenges of a fair collaboration actually in their day-to-day life in cultural relations, what would prompt them to actually tell the truth and feel safe? And that's not an easy deal. Then we had to deal with this whole thing of linguistic barriers, right? I mean, coming from India, we see it all the time. I mean, you understand India's relationship with English because of our colonial past. But it is also true, and that's tricky, that most of us have grown up learning English almost as our first language, right? So between two Indians, very often English is actually the common language. All other languages are different, and we may not know each other's languages, right? So that's actually where this thing came in. And then we are like, okay, it was becoming very English heavy. So how do you bring in other languages? Another kind of language related politics came in. People started saying, okay, maybe then French and Spanish and German. You again see there's a pattern that's happening. And then we started talking about what about the other languages, right? Then when we wanted to have these roundtables and interviews, etc., same thing. And I don't know how many of you have experienced it. I can tell you this from my life story. I'm one of those people. I work across the globe, but stationed out of India in Bangalore, and we are GMT plus 5.5. Most of the times I don't sleep before 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning. The question is, it's something for people to think about. Why am I the one sitting in an international collaboration? Why it is always me who's sleeping at 3 o'clock? Because I'm all the time trying to do that collaboration, that conversation over a Zoom call at somebody else's morning time, right? So, and that's exactly the point. I mean, we started questioning those things, that which are the time zones in which these calls are going to happen. And what do you think people will feel like? You think about someone, I mean, there are some people like me, I'm a complete night owl, I'm fine with it. A lot of people start like, their brains are not working. If you do a roundtable at their midnight, how likely are you to find something very deep, personal, in like, like meaningful? You are not going to do that. So I'm just trying to give you examples of the level at which we had to keep on intervening, and to say, in one roundtable, who are the people who are sitting? Am I going to sit with my boss and talk about how unfair my boss might have been? Not very likely. Not everyone has that kind of courage, right? Next came then the other part of it, that if there is such a language barrier, there's not enough funds for getting interpreters, then what do we do? That's actually where we brought in a lot of other kinds of nonverbal modes of communication. And you would see, I mean, this is exactly the way in which we were trying to go about it. We tried to unpack fairness as content, fairness in its contexts, and fairness as a concept. And that was really, really something which was eye-opening for us. We realized that forget about anything. Just these two words, fairness and collaboration, they don't mean the same thing to two people. They mean very different things. And what we also figured out is, and this is something which has become a very important part of my life, I have constantly been trying to unpack words, look into glossary, look into ways in which people make sense of their life, right? And language does that. Language is not just about communication, it's also a construct through which we make sense of things, we make meaning out of things, right? So we realize that if you translate something like fairness in any other language than English, the word that it leads to after translation, you try and translate it back into English, it doesn't necessarily mean fairness. It might mean justice, it might mean equality, it might mean equity, it might mean something else, which is actually where we started realizing that, as most people know of design, design is sort of a combination of form, function, and aesthetics, but it's so much more. You're mapping this entire construct as you're reframing the problem, mapping the content, the context, and the concepts into the design of it. So that really led to our toolkit having 5 different parts. We asked people that rather than just using words and doing surveys and having interviews, are there other ways in which you can express your stories? And I don't know how much you can figure it out on top that corner. You would see that there were people who were actually drawing and doodling things. And this is again something that I find very provocative. Think about all of us, right? What is the first language through which you express yourself? It's probably drawing, you're doodling something. Every child does that. Doesn't matter how poor they are, how rich they are, what's their ethnicity, what's their race, which country they come from. Your first mode of expression is always to doodle or draw something. And something very interesting happens, right? As we grow older, we go to school, we suddenly start becoming terribly judgmental about how good we are in drawing, right? How many of us are so ashamed of our handwriting that we never write one line? Do we stop doing that? We don't. Why do we stop drawing? You know, likewise, there are so many other ways through which we actually can express, but you are suddenly very judgmental about other modes, maybe embodied modes of expressions, right? So we actually try to bring in some of these into our work. And what led to the toolkit, which eventually has been widely accepted and appreciated, is a way in which we took two things, the entire design was led by people. Visual language that you see was not done by a seasoned graphic designer. Motifs, different kinds of doodles by people. We try to see a pattern. That is there a pattern of understanding of fairness somewhere in Africa versus somewhere in the US? Is there a pattern of how people are understanding collaboration somewhere in East Asia and somewhere in Europe? And that's where we found our visual language, right? And that's what led us to understanding fairness at this kind of a level, at an individual level, at an organizational level, at a societal and systemic level. And therefore, when we made the toolkit can be used digitally, but it can also be used in a physical way. And so again, when we were looking at all of these factors, we did not start by, again, thinking about how we're going to make the toolkit, because that's where all of these depth would have not come, right? We looked into how are we making sense, how are we making meaning out of the idea of fairness. We looked into people's experiences, lived experiences, their experiential perspectives, and turn them into games. So this part, as you can see, one of the parts of the toolkit, actually we call it a fair reflection game. Why reflection? It's reflection plus action, right? And that's very important, right? If we keep reflecting, then you might question, okay, what's happening? But if you keep doing, you take action, you keep making, you keep producing, without the reflection, even that doesn't happen. So the reflection was a framework that we came up with, which is reflection and action through which evaluation would be happening. And these cards that you can see, they're all based on different values, with each card associated with anything that one does. There were 4 different card sets that we came up with in the game, different ways of cards. And where we found those from? Again, the making happened from lived experience, where people's dilemma we actually took. And imagine how powerful this is. Dilemma of people around international cultural relations across the globe, which then we created into scenarios, and then people have to get into those roles. So the role playing that's happening through these card based games are happening at a level at which you are being able to embed yourself in a situation which otherwise you would have never been able to do. So that's how we design these games, which we have eventually used. And then this was one of the last images that came out. And I mean, I was just trying to show you even how this illustration came into being. It's interdependence. One of the reasons, and I'm also again being provocative. Now, I have typically seen, if this illustration was there, the one who had finally created the digital version of it would be named, right? That's what we all know. So the person who did that, we had a conversation. I remember, and it happened to be that she was my ex-student, and she's like, my name, are you going to give my name? And I said, no, I'm giving a list of 11 people's name. And she was like, what do you mean 11 people coming up with this image? I said, 11 people at the forefront. In my understanding, there are 100 people who have made this. And let me tell you, if I don't do that, then I'm actually going away from all that I'm talking about. Because this image, yes, you have used your technology, you have used your keypad, and you have used your computer. But the idea, the constructs, the concepts, the elements, everything is actually fed by people, right? So how can I say that I have created, I am the creator of this image? That's very egotistic, right? After talking about all the collaboration, this is not how collaboratively we can talk about it, right? So I wanted to give you that as an example, because I said, what about people who just went and spoke to people for days? What about people who just looked into those doodles? Those doodles are what led to it. So are we not going to then acknowledge people who have given us those ideas and beautiful concepts, right? So this is one of the things. The second project, it's an ongoing project very close to our heart that we are talking about. So we are a member of what is known as the Japan-India Transformation Technology Network. And I have been a Salzburg Global Fellow Sometime last year, I was invited at Salzburg Global Seminar, and me and some of my collaborators from Japan, so people from India and people from Japan, most of these people come from spaces of innovation, spaces of technology, design, and making, right? And there are some people who might be working at policy levels, etc., and researchers and all that. So we are currently working on a project where this is supposed to be a distributed platform, tech enabled. But what we plan to achieve through this program is we want to help people and organizations around the world. Everyone works with people, right? But then many times people, like even these days, it has almost become a fad that you talk about EDI or DEI, right? You talk about representation, you talk about diversity. But how much do you really do that? And how much can you really do it, right? Going beyond a tokenistic kind of approach, right? So we actually believed through our experiences that sometimes exclusion that happens is not particularly intentional. I have very often seen a lot of people who are very sensitive, who mean well, but in their practices, if we see their organizations, they're talking about one thing, but then it's not inclusive enough. So it's also important to recognize that sometimes this is structural and systemic. So how do we go past those barriers and actually include people, include their voices so that those can actually reach the policymakers? And again, like the unique example I was giving you where, and I intentionally again didn't show you the toolkit. I mean, if you are interested, I can always share the link and you can see it. I was talking about the process of making that. So Narrative Kitchen is actually doing that. Again, this image was done the research that I had done with 29 of my students, and we had gone into a very interesting place in India, which is called Kochi. It's in the west coast of India, where in a 2 to 3 kilometer radius, it's very well known because they host a fantastic art biennale. And I have been to Kochi Biennale, I've been to Venice Biennale. They're really at a very, very good standard. People do come over there for it. But this place is also very famous for having people who had come into Kochi across centuries and across the millennia. So it's absolutely a treasure trove if you talk about diversity. Like you have 40, 50 different communities staying in a 2 kilometer radius, right? I know many of you might get scared because you get scared about the level of population that you see in India. But it can be scary, but it can be also quite interesting because you are just seeing this little space and so much is happening over there, right? So if you see over here, as we were also trying to use the idea of narrative in a metaphorical way. So it's a kitchen of narrative. And look at the usage of the metaphor that we're using. We don't want to call it a cookbook because a cookbook, again, is prescriptive, right? You get the recipe. And a recipe of a particular thing cannot be altered too much, right? You have a certain structure within which you need to work. Instead, we said that this is going to be a kitchen of narratives where you have all these ingredients and the narratives of the ingredients. You can cook what you need to based on your mood, based on the context, based on the occasion, and the people who are going to be using it. So this was also an illustration which came where, again, like if you see it closely, it's like a mural that was done. And let me tell you again, this is interesting. Nearly 20 people actually drew it. And whoever, I mean, coming from an art and design school, people who are looking at it, and there are many other images, they can still not believe that it's possible. But they had to that space where there was this symphony that was happening. It's very difficult to draw together in the same style without having one person dominating the style, right? So these are actually different kinds of kitchen that you get to see in just one lane. And how each kitchen tells a story, the story of the Portuguese, the story of someone who might have come from somewhere else in India, the story of the British, the story of the Arab traders, and many other things that are happening over there. Sorry. Yeah. So through this, again, I was just trying to show you the space that we are in. We have been trying to find out, and this is an ongoing process, but the stories that we gathered in Kochi and later on in a place called Ahmedabad, again, a very interesting place. We had collaborated with an organization over there to also use gamification, not as an outcome, but as a process to make sense of many of these and using food as an enabler, because no two people, I mean, you might be different, but there's no human being who will not relate to food. So food becomes a great way to sort of connect and correlate and question, And a place like India, again, with its plurality and everything, food can also become highly political. Your food choices can be highly political, whether it is at the level of caste, whether it's at the level of religion, whether it's at the level of which region you come, your socioeconomic background. It could also be like how have you grown up? What are the influences that you have? What is your gender? And I'll come to that in a little while. But this is basically something that I wanted to show you again. These are illustrations which came out of it. It's a narrative finding framework that we were talking about. What becomes barriers of narratives when you try to engage with people in the form of any kind of making or whatever you do? So it's like from positionality and privilege to comfort and discomfort to othering and belonging to juxtaposition to generosity and compassion, relationship and tools shifts, unlearning assumptions and realizations. I'm not getting into the depth of it at the moment because we won't have so much time, but trying to show you how the findings of these different narratives that people are finding by collating, correlating, going through a very deeply immersive experience, this could be a narrative finding framework that one can use. Say you are trying to create an outcome, right? It could be a product, could be a service, could be an app, could be really anything. Your means could be, say, digital fabrication, or your means could be that maybe you're using a certain kind of like a software. But if it's meant for people to use, the whole point is how can it be people friendly? How can it be people led? How can it really be driven by actually people's needs and aspirations and desires and their context, and not done in a top down way where someone decides what others should be using? And that's where I move to the next little part of it. That one of the things that I have been noticing in all our work, which is becoming increasingly important, is to understand not only the people that you work for, and ideally you should work with, but who are you? As someone who is making an intervention, you could be an activist, you could be a policymaker, you could be a technologist, a scholar, whoever you are. There's no way anything can ever be objective, right? We bring a part of ourselves into something, which means that we have our own biases. So we have been working a lot on the idea of a positionality, and which is, say, Leslie Ann Knowles' work. This is Sylvia Duckworth's work on the wheel of privilege and power. What I find extremely powerful is if you contextualize this, because this is probably set in a certain context, which may not work in all contexts, So, for example, on this side, you can see an adaptation or a version of an Indian wheel of privilege and power. Now, when I use it a lot of times, and we have done that, we have realized, so this is, for example, a gamification kind of a process. Like there are many, like some 200 cards that we have made as a part of one of the games. You would see that people are making connections with food, and that is also becoming a way to sort of understand how they include and how they exclude and all of that. This is, for example, like, one of the cases where we try to understand from people that in your wheel of position, power, and privilege, do you think you want to add one or two other dimensions which are not there? And some very interesting things have come up, right? So, for example, in one of the contexts, people said that all of this, my sexuality, my gender, my race, etc., may not be, for example, so much about race in India, but maybe caste and religion, etc. They talked about, for example, whether I have siblings or not, and what am I in that sibling relationship? Am I the elder one, the younger one? And what's my gender and sexuality does in a way influence who I am, what I do, how I see the world. Likewise, a very, very interesting perspective which has been coming again and again and again is that people are saying that they definitely feel it's very important to add one more. And that is technology. And let me tell you, contrary to popular belief, people were not talking about access to technology. That's the given, right? We are all the time, whenever talks about, one talks about inclusion, diversity, we talk about access to technology. There are a lot of parts in the world which many people probably won't know about, which includes India. You may have great access to technology irrespective of how poor you are, right? However, what is your relationship with technology is what determines, and that's very, very interesting. So, for example, and that leads me to the next example that I was giving, a very big corporate house, not naming them, they have their corporate citizenship program. It's almost like CSR. They give huge amount of funds primarily for technology enabled interventions for contexts in which, like maybe underprivileged context, or maybe they work on the future of education, future skills, technological innovation, vocational skills, etc. So we did a piece of work with them where we helped them to see the future of all of these in the next 10 years. And this was actually happening just before the pandemic. And it's very interesting over there that when these people were talking about it, although, I mean, you can see the diversity in the kind of people who are there, right? We realize there's such a huge gap between people who are giving the money, people who are taking the money, people who are distributing the money, and people who are actually implementing reality, right? And no two people in the same organization could understand and talk about it the same way. Also, very important was that they had the most stereotypical one story that they had to talk about their success, whereas there are so many. I mean, imagine an organization which is claiming to have touched upon 700,000 lives. When we are asking them, can you share 3 stories? They just talk about those 2 stories which are there on their website, their newsletter, their annual report. They just cannot go beyond it. My question is, what does it imply? Because then when we are asking them, okay, you are talking about technology and technology bringing in revolution, etc., what is your parameter? Many of them would tell you that it's about, okay, they have made an app, and how many people have downloaded, right? Yes, that could be one thing, but what are they doing with that? You don't know. Now, in one such project, when okay, I'll bring it to the next thing. What we found was very interesting, like a community of people who were given cell phones and software, thought that could create better education. Do you know why that particular community, they were very poor, why they were using the cell phone, and what is it that they were using the cell phone for? So our little experience was that this organization, which is claiming that they have empowered people through education, in however they were talking about it, was not really how they were empowered. Did empowerment happen? Yes. I'll tell you how empowerment happened, if you want to call it empowerment. So, quite a few women in that community said that they do not want to go anywhere without their cell phones, right? Why? For 2 reasons. One is they felt nobody ever bothered asking them what they want. No one, right? People come and they give you aid. People come and give you things and resources and money. No one has ever bothered asking, what is it that you want? These women thought that after a very long day, after doing so much hard work, and many of their husbands are alcoholic, they will beat them up and all that. The only little thing that they're looking for is a little freedom and entertainment. So these devices are allowing them to maybe watch something on YouTube and just have a little smile, right? Now, how can you not talk about that as a story? Can you imagine? Like, it's so much more powerful than someone claiming that I've learned something and it's helping me with getting a job. Like, think about this woman. The other thing was, which was phenomenal, they said, and I'm obviously framing it in my language and maybe intellectualizing it, but in the ground reality, the stories, they were saying, I use the phone as an evidence. So they were saying that many of them in their community, if someone is trying to hit them, beat them, abuse them, they use the phone as a device to do a video recording, and that's their evidence, right? So again, I feel like this is brilliant, right? Think about their relationship with technology. They have it in their mind, and they have done this. Someone has done it. That someone, their husband was trying to beat them up. She actually said that, I'm going to record it. I'm just going to go to the police station. And until then, and I'll tell you why this is really transformational. Until then, they thought that no one will believe them, right? They never had evidence. If they went, there was no proof. This enabled them to actually voice out what they never could voice. Someone was telling them, so there are many different things. I mean, I've seen many of these people, they look for CCTV. Now, it's very interesting that it's also that many of these people now, watch series and films and everything which is widely available. You no longer have to go to a movie theater and spend money in order to have access to those. And I hope you all will agree that there is a huge rise in crime thrillers. People love watching it. What we have also noticed often is when people watch these things and you don't even think that there's anything educational, but people make these connections. They suddenly think that if something happens, there could be a CCTV and you can actually go for that recording. And I've had that experience where people, someone who's poor and someone had given them a false allegation that something was stolen. They are the ones who actually thought about it, that maybe we can go look for the CCTV footage and that can help in voicing what otherwise no one will believe me about. So I feel like this is also a voice we never think about. Like there can be not so good unintended consequences. There could also be very, very interesting consequences that we don't think about. And that's also because we don't spend enough time in understanding these perspectives, right? Because we are so like unidirectional and unidimensional in thinking about how we define success. We are not looking into all these other things which are happening around. So the next one, I'll probably just play it a little bit, not fully. It's a project that we did earlier this year. It was funded by like a Swiss organization called South Cultural Funds. And they had given this to about 6 organizations or 6 people. Very interesting was that your intervention had to be digital. Okay. And the thing that we did was trying to make certain urban young adult community understand climate change through lived narratives, not about climate change through these big words. And climate change has become like, many of these have become buzzwords. How can you make it lived and real? Because still a lot of people are in denial. They don't really understand what's happening, right? And what was also interesting was there was an element of art in it, that this had to be done, the entire intervention had to be designed digitally, but there was also a virtual exhibition that it was a part of. So that also kind of triggered how this would be done. Just a little I'll show and then I'll dive into the self and the world. This workshop series intended to help the participants who were in their early 20s to reflect, understand, and act. It began with a lot of activities delving into the ideas of self and the world around us, and using these as lenses to situate ourselves in the context of climate change and thereby climate action. The entire journey of co finding a climate compass was to focus on the importance of walking the path and finding a direction together. This navigation started and also ended with unpacking the larger concepts and finding keywords to collectively co design a visual identity for the project and locating visual references to find what narratives, colors, shapes, emotions, moods do we associate with climate action and why? How is our worldview shaped? We tried to find powerful narratives related to climate change that make us relate to it and make climate change relevant. The personal and political, the abstract and the concrete, the old and the new, the changes and continuity all got juxtaposed in the story finding and sharing sessions. There were contexts of all the co travelers in this journey which got interspersed. We had played games to understand the concepts better, some of which were designed in house at the epicenter for other projects. We also called experts in climate change and instructional design to give us feedback. We needed a foundation to diverge out of and converge back in, and the perfect one seemed to be the UNDP Climate Dictionary. The idea was to make the users and audience of our outcomes become more climate literate, climate conscious, and climate fluent. We tried to understand our own cliches and buzzwords we know of regarding these. Once these narratives from various contexts started being added to a common reservoir, we ensured to check those for authenticity, factual correctness, relevance, and appropriateness by an expert and categorize those. From there, the idea of two distinct and yet interconnected outcomes emerged. One was to create a few games with boards and cards, which can make the users gain better climate vocabulary with a fair idea of the causality and power of informed choices and intentionality. And the other one was an altered journal with the base of the climate dictionary illustrated by hyperlocal and contextual narrative. So this was actually a part of the virtual, the exhibition where, I mean, we situated, you could see that one had to go over there and actually browse around. to see some of these, and these are the younger people. So these are some of the main projects I wanted to show you to sort of talk about how narratives can be used in so many different ways. Because if you look at it in fair collaboration, the final outcome was a toolkit, whereas art and design were used as processes. Whereas in this one, there was a heavy stress on bringing in art, but we were using technology in order to get there, right? So many of these examples which are there, I mean, I won't get into the detail of these. So say these are exhibition design projects that we have done. Same processes we have used, this, in fact, all of these were done at a very famous science institute in India called the National Center for Biological Sciences. So if you look at the way the fabrication happened and everything that happened, we went through a very similar process again over there to figure out. Whereas if you look at some of these, of course, looking at the visual clues, you can understand that many of them are situated in an urban slum or in a village with very, very, like, not so privileged people, but we were still trying to figure out what are they going to say, and not particularly in the way in which we thought they would be talking. This was in Myanmar. You would see there are people from some 15 different countries across Southeast Asia. Food and cooking became a way for understanding each other and making sense of the place. Whereas this one is a seven-layered installation for a scientific exhibition, where this enabled to unpack the different layers of meaning that was there embedded in a particular scientific concept. So the question is that, say, this is a very famous shadow puppet community in India. There are many such communities. When we talk about technology-enabled innovation, very often, again, people don't spend enough time in understanding them and their context, right? These were storytellers. They were knowledge keepers. Their idea was to intergenerationally pass on knowledge through their performative story forms, right? When we sometimes feel, and a lot of people do this, they are saying that, okay, we are trying to help the community. What they do is they take the shadow puppet, and they're very beautiful. They will help them create and produce a lot of lanterns, and then they will sell those, right? And we all buy those. But what is interesting is that many of these community members, you think they're earning a lot of money, but in our experience, we have seen they feel that they have been reduced from a storyteller, a wisdom keeper, a knowledge sharer, into somebody whose only identity is that little leather puppet that's been made into a product, and then you sort of scale, right? So where are we going wrong with it, right? So that's why it's very important to bring in a the idea of politics as we think about something like business, and also bring in a cultural lens to it. And that's why, again, I mean, I wanted to juxtapose these two images, that both of these, if you see the one below, these are people who are CEOs and CEOs of a company who are trying to bring in, again, a technology enabled learning system in an urban slum. And on top, these are women from communities which are very traditional and orthodox. They have to really fight with their families to come and work, but they work for an ITES services, where they work with the US. And what's interesting is that very often, again, all the interventions that happen, there is a huge disconnect between the top and the bottom, right? Because nobody's talking to each other to understand what is it that they want. And that's why I wanted to have this picture, that most of the different projects we have done, if you see the ones below, these are some of the motives which came from the unique project. You can understand people who work at that kind of level with international cultural relations, they are mostly quite privileged. These motifs on the right that you see in Climate Compass are by young adults who are making sense of those climate narratives, but most of them come from an art and design background, the way they're making sense of it. And those little girls that you see, they're college going girls from an migrant community in an urban slum. Their best way of expression, again, is visuals, and there's no difference. These are people from different parts of the world. These are people from some other parts of the world. They're from some other part of the world. But, they're pretty much, I feel, are the same in their ways of thinking, in their ways of meaning making. So I wanted to sort of go into that last bit of what I have understood is meaning can be made through different ways. We all know that there is this message and media, there is metaphor and mode and material. But then it's very, very important to understand one thing, that you can think of meaning as a noun, but you can also look into meaning as a verb, as an action. It's a constant process. And what's also very important is to understand meaning as a preposition, with, by, for, from, to. And I think that's where the ideas of creativity comes in. How do you do that? How do you move from the noun to the verb? And there's no one fixed answer, there's no template for it. Many of those things that you see, they are actually from different notes that I have. And again, not getting into the details of it, the examples that I showed you actually will show you how many of these have been taken into consideration. Feeling, finding, framing, fostering, foraging, faking, and fantasizing meaning, which people came a lot of times. Searching, seeking, sculpting, solving, structuring, and sharing of meaning that people do. And also immersion, interrogation, interpretation, interconnection, interaction, intervention, but most importantly, imagination. I'll end with one thing, which I again am going back to one of the first things that I spoke about. I'm becoming more and more drawn to the idea of linguistic constructs. So when I was about to give this talk and I thought of doing this from making to meaning making, I was thinking, okay, I'm constantly saying meaning. If I have to use the word meaning in an Indian language, what would it translate to? And then I realized that the word, if I have to translate it into most Indian languages, it would be artha. That you see artha. Now, if you Google artha, and you don't have to trust me on it, because meaning is artha. Now, Google artha and see what artha means. Very interestingly, it actually also means wealth. It also means aim. It means purpose. It means motive. It means object, and it means intent. And if you look into the Indian, like there are so many different philosophies in a plural place like India, but one of the Indian schools of thoughts will tell you that artha, in terms of wealth, is one of the four pillars of making sense of life, you know, along with dharma, kama, and moksha. And you don't look at it in a bad way, it's all interrelated. So you're seeking of wealth, you're searching for wealth. It's not an end, it's a means to making sense of your life, and it's one of the four goals of life. And I think that really summed it up for me, because I felt I've been able to sort of say what I was trying to say, that when we talk about doing interventions, I think most of us somewhere talk about making the world a better place, right? Through our acts of making, through our acts of technology. And that creates prosperity and wealth. And that's also about meaning, and that's also about intent, if you look at it in the larger realm of artha. So that's me, and thank you so much for listening to me.
If anyone has any questions, I have a mic.
Hi,
Hi.
thank you for this amazing talk. I was wondering about your origin and where you started with all of the questioning and the provocativeness, because I'm pretty early in my career as a makerspace person.
Right.
And sometimes I feel an opinion, but I think it's a little radical, and I don't want to, stir the pot too much. And I don't want to look like I'm questioning like the everything of everything. And I was wondering, like, where did you get the audacity and like the confidence, and also like who supported you? Like, how did that all come together so that you could be here provoking all of us?
Thank you for asking that question. I think to some degree I was born this way. But it also is the fact that I think I grew up in an environment, and I would say this, that my parents, particularly my mother, plays a huge role. And she keeps telling me that she's the one who told me that you don't have to just believe someone just because they're saying, because they're older than you are, which includes herself. It's a different thing that she said that the first person on whom that backfired was her. because I started questioning everything that she would say, right? I wouldn't take it for granted. But I feel that if you look into stories, and that is my take, and a lot of Indian stories, South Asian stories, they actually are not founded on the basis of believing. It is always founded on the basis of questioning. I think as a very early age, I started listening to many of these stories which only lead to more questions. They won't give you an answer. So I was okay with asking than solving, and I think that's a very interesting thing that you asked me. Now that I'm talking to you, I realize that that shapes the way in which I look at my work. Like, even when, if you may believe that when we had the toolkit, people were all praising and all, I never thought that that was the end. When we did our exhibitions, or, we have worked on developing an app and all that, it was never an end for me. It was a beginning, because I felt that only when people start interacting with it, you know, is when I will understand whether it's really working or not. Otherwise, what's the point? So I think that's one thing. My school also shaped me in a great way. I also was a young journalist there was a states newspaper called Statesman from the age of maybe 13, 14 until I graduated out of high school. I used to write very often. And then from that, when I was about 14, 15-year old, I was selected to write a book on UNICEF, like child rights. And that really opened up my mind, because I started realizing that a lot of these little things that we talk about in our lives, that my little problem, you have a problem with your best friend, I'm not getting this, getting that. There are people who have such big problems you can't even think about, right? So with all of these things together, I think my worldview became something where I started realizing that whatever you do, you need it. That's very important. I really love teaching, but for me, teaching is a way of co-sense making. We are co-travelers in that journey. Second point is, I think as a person, I'm quite fearless, and I feel that it's a very, very important thing to become fearless, because that's one of the things that always tie us back, because you're always stuck in the status quo, right? Because you sometimes might fear a person, sometimes you might fear an authority, sometimes you're fearing yourself because you feel that you're quite comfortable in your misery. Many people do that, right? You would rather be in misery than step out of it and go for an unknown freedom. So I feel like if you are driven by the idea of freedom in a larger way, you're bound to be fearless, because you can't be seeking freedom and not be, you know be guided by fear. So yeah, that would be it. And of course, I've had my own shares of ups and downs in life. I've studied at my undergrad, I studied chemistry with physics and mathematics. My post graduation was actually on education with design and inclusion as focus, and then many other things that I did. But I think this journey of working for people, working by people, to working with people had started early on in my life. And I don't say that I have achieved it, but I am exploring it, which is why I said that I'm not an expert, but I'm an explorer at heart and by action.
Thank you, Sudebi.
Thank you.
I have so many questions, but I'll try to maybe limit it to two. I've been a software developer for nearly 50 years, and it's all of a sudden in vogue. I mean, yes. Okay, great. So I've been a software developer for almost 50 years. 10 of those years were at Apple. And so I think we were doing what's now popularized as user-centric design way before a lot of other companies sort of caught on to it. I'm trying to sort of understand or to put your talk into my framework of understanding and I'm trying to grasp, are you sort of, is inclusive design sort of concentrating on the end goals, but sort of facilitating like equal weights amongst the participants who are trying to solve that goal?
I think that's a very interesting question. I would say that in the world of design, I think for the last few years, the current discourses have been even to move from or question, as you were saying, user-centric design, people are now saying, and a lot of people who have been big proponents of what is known as centered design are big critiques of it. They're saying that, you probably need to do humanity centered design, and taking it one notch higher, saying that when you say everything has to be human centric or centered, that's also problematic for the planet. So then people are now talking about life centered design. And the way I look at inclusion in my little way is that someone decides who's the user, right? I question it at that point, that it means that somebody is trying to have a system out there. So why should someone use something? That's the point. Is it coming from a space that something is planted in somebody's head as a need? And you think it's a need, but it's actually an aspiration in the packaging of need, right? So, and then we are saying, okay, there is user centricity of that. And that's quite interesting for me. And let me, again, I have nothing against, and I'm not making it like that, but the very fact that very few people in the world can actually access or have an Apple product. Why is that? If it's so beautiful by design, which it might be, why most people in this planet cannot use Apple? And I would question it at that. So if there is something which is beautiful and it's for a select few, which it could be, I mean, there are so many things which are just for a handful, then I would say that it's user centric again in a certain context determined by some people and only some people. I don't think people, it's user centered, not people centered, which is why if you notice, I was intentionally trying to use the word people as opposed to user always, because use also, I feel, very often becomes very capitalistic, sometimes very, it's always about how much you're consuming. But I'm talking about something that people might even engage with, say an experience, right? I mean, when you're experiencing something, you may not be using it, but in some way you are interacting. So there is a relationship which you are going back to. So yes, I agree with the probably the foundational principles behind it, but I think in my own work, I'm quite critical, and I put it back into this because this is something that I bring in a lot into my work. That is it something by design or is it something by default? Is it something which is a chance or is it a choice? And whose choice is it? And where is that choice coming from? And keeping in mind that every choice has a consequence, whether we see it or not. So to basically be able to make choices, I think is something that I always aspire for. And that's to me is freedom. So, yeah.
If I could ask a follow-up.
Yes, please.
There was a point where you talked about the ladies with the cell phones and feeling
Yes.
like nobody ever asked them exactly what they wanted or what they,
Yes,
what they
yes.
wanted or needed.
Yeah.
And so are you really in technology and high tech, right? There's this product manager who's supposed to
Yeah.
be the voice of the user to the team.
Right.
Are you saying that whole construct is perhaps flawed? And if so, how would we actually get out into the world to find out what people really need?
I think this is something which I know it's philosophical, but trust me, I can give a million examples to show that it's not philosophical. It's the crux of everything. It's the notion of time. And I was talking, we were doing a workshop at Fab Foundation 2 days back, and we were talking about it that in the last many years of our work with people across the world, if there is one thing that we have realized that one should understand is that time and the understanding of time is a maker or breaker of any work people do, because there are people and cultures in the world which look at time as a transactional thing. There are people who look at time as a relational thing. Why am I saying this is even the amount of time that is given for a so-called user study and research is highly political. I have my students in a design school and I'm highly critical many times where they already want say they're app, and they have to quickly make the wireframes, and then there are clients, etc. What they do is they take what is known as an empathy map template, right? They go out, there is 2 hours, they claim that they have done the research, they have filled up the empathy template and like empathy map template, and they probably there are 30 of those, they're collating that, doing a very simplistic survey. And yes, it's user study. But the question is, how is that study designed? Is problematic. How much time have you given? And I often ask this as a provocation to my students that if you walk on the street or you're sitting at your home, obviously the university where I teach people are from privilege. They would have never made it there if they didn't have privilege, right? Would we have opened our houses to people coming in, taking photographs, taking videos, and making comments on us? None of us would. So, what gives us the right that we sort of suddenly go to user study, expect that in the first 15 minutes of my interaction with another human being, they're going to open up and be authentic and actually give us insight with which we are claiming that we are designing a product or a service. So I feel like again it's a much larger thing. And if you may come back and ask me that, Sudebi, there is always money driving everything, there is business. So people don't have so much time to give for that. Then what you're talking about is highly idealistic. I can actually maybe give a lot of examples to show that it isn't about how much, but how are you using the time? But the fact is, and it's one of my favorite examples, that if you want to have a baby, you have to give 9 months for it. If you think you want to give 2 months and you want a baby, you know that's not possible. So to have that humility and not have the arrogance of people who design business that I want something very fast. We know that you make a flyover like that, you make a building like that, it's bound to fail and falter, right? So I feel that these are much larger level questions which are, I think it's easier to ask these in smaller organizations, smaller settings, because you have more things in your control. When you're in a larger organization, it's very hard because how many people will you go and talk about? But I feel, and that's why this image also came from an interesting initiative I did during the pandemic called the Musical Manifesto. So this illustration emerged as a part of that, that there are some 60 to 100 people who are around the world who took part in it during the pandemic, shared about their perspectives, shared about grief and all. And this was one thing which was common. So you can see the image where it's like stretching time, because some people understand time in a certain way. Their relationship with how much time is given for what is very important. And I feel one of the biggest power play is in the hands of people who can give away money, because many times without understanding much they get to decide what is going to be the overall project cycle, right? What would be the deadlines? Do those deadlines even, are they even real? Are they contextual? Are they people friendly? We don't know. And many of us are guilty of it. So one of the other things that I very much like doing in our organization is we design evaluation a lot of times. We love evaluation for figuring out intangible measures of impact, which often cannot be understood by simple numerical ways. So yeah, that's a long answer to your question, but yeah, I'm very happy to have a chat with you maybe later, surely.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I have a question related to the team collaboration you were mentioning during your presentation. Because for a creative team or like a creative, like every project, like team working is very important. And then you also mentioned sometimes teammates begin to hate each other. Sometimes like somebody just dominant and other people feel like their voices are covered up by anybody else. So I'm wondering, like, in your point of view, do you have any like a specific kind of like a team collaboration state? Like, okay, somebody is like leading, or like when they should lead, because I believe like leader in the team is very important as well.
Yeah.
But like how to like lead at the same time, not let anybody else feel like their voices are covered. Yeah, like how to make this kind of balance during this journey.
Again, no easy answer to it, but one of the reasons why for a long time I had one of those images was that of dialogue and that of equity, because no two people are similar, right? And I think, I don't know her name, she raised a very point about fear. So many people, whether we realize it or not, we are so fearful. Some people are fearful of conflict. Some people want to please everybody. They do not want to be the bad person, right? So their entire life goes in trying to please others, and you can never please everybody, right? On the other hand, there are some people who could be quite rude and they can be like, I don't care. So I think one of the important things at an individual level is to learn how you can be assertive with kindness. You can say no with kindness, you don't have to let go of kindness, let go of compassion just because you're holding on to something. So there is nothing wrong in being a leader. It's great to be a leader. But I think the question is to ask, what do we understand by leader? I think very often we mix up a leader with a dictator or somebody who is an authoritarian person. And that's not leadership necessarily, right? There are different forms of leaders. So I feel that there's a piece of work we had done in the past with University of Michigan Stamp School of Design and Virginia Commonwealth University, Qatar, where we were actually trying to put young people, college going students together. And it was called Intercultural Collaboration by Design. So there are actually some people from Stamps who are doing very interesting work. And in fact, they have something called the intercultural, I think it's called IDI, Intercultural uh, Competency Index or something like that. I am forgetting the exact term for it. But it's a process through which they are trying to see if, say, all of us are collaborating through a process. At the beginning of the collaboration, where are we? And at the end of the collaboration, where are we? How much have we journeyed through it? So you can sort of see the kind of patterns which are there. But I feel it's actually the recognition of an individual in the whole, and the fact that you can be an individual, you can be unique, but you can also be together, right? Where again, the problem that happens, I have seen in collaboration and anything is, we feel if you have to come together, you have to be uniform. I don't think you have to be uniform because that becomes homogeneous, right? How do you retain the heterogeneity? How do you retain the plurality and the multiplicity? And it's like a living organism, right? So if you are interested at all, you can also look at this thing which a lot of people are now talking about pluriversal design, where they talk about a world with many centers. They're questioning the politics of inclusion in itself, saying, if I say I'm going to include you, I get to choose that you are to be included. That's also problematic in some way, right? Somebody is deciding that someone needs to be included, right? So I feel like there's no easy answer, but I feel I always bring everything back to the idea of intent. If we have the intent to know, and that knowing is never about others, I think with every person that one knows, I feel you also know a bit of yourself which you did not know earlier, right? So I think being open to rediscovering yourself and the fact that many of us behave differently in different contexts. Not everyone is the same in every context, right? So which means in different collaborative environment, you behave differently. So then you have to think about what is it that is driving you towards it and what is it that's not. So, and which is why I was talking about the idea of time, that if you are someone for whom time is relational, you are going to use the time to develop, foster, hone relationships. If you're someone for time is transactional, you might be perpetually be driven by deadlines and say, if that's the deadline, I'm sort of, so if you see this one, I wrote here, look at this. I've written gaze, goal, and gaps. So if you are goal driven, and absolutely, there is no judgment about anything, but the recognition that some people are driven by goal, some people are driven by gaze, which means you really want to see and understand and observe. And then there are gaps that can also lead to how you make sense of even your collaboration. How do you go about it? Yeah,
Thank you so much.
welcome.
Thank you for this fascinating talk and this fascinating look at your projects. And I'm wondering, what's in the future for you? What are you working on next?
Yeah, one of the things is that I have always wanted to collaborate, and quite early on in my life, I had gotten opportunities to maybe start an organization, and I am glad that I had the wisdom to not do that because I always felt, it might find funny to a lot of people. If there is one thing that I'm scared of certainty. I I do not like when things are fully certain because it means things are never going to change. And it is true, even when something great is happening to me, and you say, oh, this is like the dream that I'm living in, I feel like, I don't know, there could be other possibilities, and I'm not afraid of suffering. I'm not afraid of hardships. I don't want things to be static. That really is something which bothers me. I'm really scared of it. So, having said that, so obviously, I'm looking for many more collaborations. I see an interesting journey in my life. Like I had, for the longest time in my life, I was facilitating creative collaborations. Right. I've done a lot of work in Southeast Asia where I love bringing different people together and help them collaborate creatively. Then I realized that mere creative collaboration doesn't work. The collaborations need to be fair and equitable. Right. So I would say that there are 2 or 3 ideas, I won't call them projects, which are really driving me at the moment. One of them is, as I mentioned, was this narrative kitchen. It's an ongoing larger project we're working on. The other project that we are working on, not really project, but a larger umbrella of work, is we call it the dignity compass. We help people and organizations find their own directions of when they work with people. How do you uphold the dignity of people in your work, in your intervention, not only at an intentional level, but at an implementation level? And one of the other things which really keep me going is I love taking something which look like quite improbable, impossible, and intangible, and I love breaking it down and making it concrete without diluting it, without making it simplistic. And that's what I love the most, which is why I refuse to be caged as a designer, as an artist, as an innovator. I mean, maybe a bit of all of that and more, because I feel like I love that. So I feel like I'm definitely looking forward to many more opportunities to work globally, to work with people and organizations and ideas. And the other thing that I totally love doing is that, say, if you have a fuzzy idea and you don't know how to go about it, how do you make that fuzziness be a reality? How do you make that happen? But truly in an equitable and participatory way. So, yeah, these are some of the things I'm working on and some more things in the pipeline. So, let's see what happens. We also work a lot on futures and foresight. So that is something I didn't mention, but very deeply drawn by the ideas of narratives of the future, and not in a way in which where you sort of predict what's going to happen with trends, but more like multiple future possibilities, and coming up with those future possibilities with collective imagination and stories from people. So that's something that interests me a lot.
Hi, Sudebi.
I
I had a question. Going back to you were talking about the student who did that illustration for the project, and they wanted their name on it, and you said there should be many more. It got me thinking, and I hate to be the person to bring this topic up, but sort of, yeah, is there it just got me thinking, is there a way sort of, how would you think about AI in that context, right? So, and is there room for potentially, a more ethical version of AI where people can opt in, right, to being sort of part of that group that sort of are credited and are part of the creators behind whatever that AI creates, right?
I think this is actually one of my current ongoing endeavor. I don't really have an easy answer to it. I'm myself exploring it. But I think I'm deeply interested in this topic, particularly, when you talk about creativity, innovation, art, design, anything which is creative, there is often, forget about AI, there's a very thin line between inspiration and plagiarism in sometimes. And let me tell you that uh, it's quite easy in an academic setting when you say, okay, you have plagiarized, right? You're using a software to figure out textually what have you done, right? And maybe these days people can also figure out visually. But what about me saying, say I'm sitting in a cafeteria chatting with you, and there might be a very interesting idea that popped up. Maybe you spoke about it. I may not even remember that you did. And I have gone ahead and I'm so deeply inspired. I'm taking it forward. And, how do you talk about it? And I have always been driven by this question because I mean, I don't like using the word victim because I don't believe in victimhood like that. But my life has been a full journey. I can write a novel on it. The level of plagiarism that has happened about me or with me, I can't even tell you, because you can see how I am as a person, quite vocal, and I'm like this always. So if I am like get an idea, I'm that person, I will not hold it, right? I'm just going to share it with people. And then one conversation, someone asking, I am telling. And very often I keep seeing it. All my life, I've seen it that people, without acknowledging me at all, they have taken it and they have made it into a business. They have gone, presented papers, they have written a grant on it, earned millions. And and the thing is that, again, I don't have an evidence of it. It's a different question. I didn't even have the intent to go and fight. I mean, I have always believed I have many more ideas I can do with those. You want to take some, take. But, and I also believe in copy left in many ways when it comes to wisdom and all that. That's fine. But so I feel that when that it's very hard, right? Like, say if you are, I mean, I love music, right? If you're composing music, very often it might happen that you're not intentionally doing it, but some tune that you might have heard somewhere, and that's influencing, right? So how would you do that? And then with AI, this becomes like many-fold bigger. So I don't think I have an answer, but I think me and some of my friends, we have often talked about it, and this probably it's something that I might work with in future. If that might be a thing, that AI and ethics and fairness, and where is that line? Is there a way to, like how I'm talking about your positionality, is there a way to figure out your artistic and designerly and scholarly positionality, and then trace it back and say, why do you do what you do? Why do you see what you see? Why do you reject what you do? So maybe.
Thank you, Sudebi,
Yeah.
for being here this evening. Thank you to the Fab Foundation for their partnership. Thank you to all of you in our audience. If there are any further questions, I invite you to come down and ask them one-on-one. I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you.